Hey, Zach, first time listening, long time caller. I think you mean the opposite. First time caller, long time listener. What are some of the most misleading stats from the NFL season, whether they are good or bad? And the reason why you're wrong about that, you can't be a long time caller unless you know the show exists, which means it cannot be possibly your first time listening. Does that make sense? If you've never listened to the show before, but you're a long time caller, that doesn't make any sense. That makes sense, right? It does. Okay. Stats. There are so many meaningless stats in not just football, just in sports. People value stats and numbers way too much. There is value to stats. I'm not saying that, but the way that people use stats to evaluate players is wrong. There's this like fantasy football mentality where people don't know football very well, but they play fantasy football, so they rely on numbers and touchdowns and interceptions, and they only look at football from the analytics part because they don't actually know football very well. It's people that are like math nerds or people that don't know the game just rely on stats. It's very lazy, and it's the wrong way, in my opinion. And a lot of people. So, by the way, I've got a couple contacts in NFL front offices. They all agree with me. They all say, yeah, there's a culture in the sports world and in the world of football where fans are beginning to buy into this, I call it fantasy football crap, where they think that touchdowns or statistics mean a player is good or bad. It's not true. Stats are not the story. That's how I would put it. There's a story behind the numbers. One way to put it is, the 49ers dominated the Kansas City Chiefs statistically in the Super Bowl, but which team won? The Chiefs won. Oh, interesting. Or think about the fact that, you can have a high completion percentage, but it's only because you throw checkdowns and 2-yard passes the entire game, and you never threw a touchdown, you never had a good throw, you never threw the ball downfield, you just threw checkdowns all game. Having a high completion percentage can be incredibly overrated. It's really easy to skew numbers and make it to fit your narrative. People do this all the time, especially analysts on TV, selectively pick numbers that fit their narrative and ignore the numbers that don't agree with the things they're talking about, rather than just looking at the film. Film, especially in football, more than other sports, like shooting percentage in basketball is hard to argue with because it's a different sample size. But in football, the film doesn't lie. The film is way more important than the numbers. Max Crosby is an incredible defensive end for the Oakland Raiders, or I guess now the Vegas Raiders. And his numbers won't show up as this incredible, like he's good, but the way he produces is a lot different than guys like Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack gets a lot of sacks. There's the other, Clelin Ferrell, the new defensive end the Raiders have. He sets the edge. He stops the running game. He helps in a lot of ways other than getting sacks. So my point is that people only understand certain numbers and they ignore other things that matter and are relevant to playing a position in football. Having good stats doesn't mean you're a good player. You can throw for a ton of yards, but what if you lose by 40 points and all the yards you're getting are in the fourth quarter at the end of the game when the other team is in a prevent defense just allowing you to steal yards underneath? That's my point. Stats are not the story. There's a story behind all the numbers you're reading and listening to. I don't know. It's interesting, you can't use numbers alone to evaluate a player or evaluate a quarterback or a receiver or anybody. My best example of this, there are 3 quarterbacks who played college football that put up incredible numbers and have done nothing in the NFL. Kellen Moore was a great quarterback at Boise State, had a noodle arm, wasn't an NFL quarterback even remotely. Sean Mannion set Pac-12 records in college football, done nothing. I think he's Kirk Cousins' backup today. He at one point couldn't beat out Jared Goff when Jared Goff was bad. What's the other guy? Luke Falk, quarterback at Washington State, played in an air raid system, had tremendous numbers. He's out of the league. I don't think he'll ever be back. Reading off statistics is not the same as player evaluation. A lot of people, especially you see it on TV, you see it on YouTube, a lot of people go, the guy had 35 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, he's a good quarterback. It's like, no, you can't deduce the game down to numbers. I think that's why my show is, I'm very proud of it. My film analysis series is incredible because it goes beyond the numbers. I don't just list off statistics. That's not any kind of analysis. That's just reading a list. Stats are a shortcut. What if you throw a ton of interceptions and they're all tipped in the air, or they hit your receiver in the hands, they bounce up in the air, then the ball gets picked off? Is that your fault? That's not the quarterback's fault. Numbers are easy to be skewed. You have to ask yourself what causes the stats. I've said this thing multiple times. The stats are not the story. There's a story behind every number you're reading. Why is the guy throwing 35 touchdowns? Why does he have 11 interceptions? Maybe they're not all his fault. Maybe they are. Maybe he has only 3 interceptions all year, but the reality is he should have had 20, but the other ones were all dropped by defenses. You ever thought about that? There's a lot behind it. You can't just rely on the numbers. This is my main point. Now, numbers are great, phenomenal for situational decision making. When you're at the end of a game and you're like, should we go for it on 4th and 1? What is the outcome based on percentages? That's where NFL front offices especially use analytics and use numbers, is to help them decide, should we challenge here? Should we kick an onside kick here? Should we go for it on 4th and goal? Should we kick a field goal or go for a touchdown? Go for 3 points instead of, whatever it is. That's how NFL teams use analytics. They don't use analytics and they don't use numbers to evaluate players. Fans do that, not people that work in the football world. Again, numbers do not determine whether or not a player is good. Here's the best way I can compare that to. You say a guy has good numbers, so therefore, if a guy has good statistics, he must be good. I'll break that theory right now. Does having a college degree mean you're smart? No. Having a college degree does not necessarily mean you're a smart person. They don't go hand in hand. Now, a lot of people think that's what it means. It's not true. I'm going to tell you a story. I know 2 people. One is an undergrad, and one got his master's already. They're a slightly different age group, but they both have a professional career path working as psychiatrists. So the guy with the master's degree works as a counselor. He's sad, he's single, he's lonely, he's miserable, he has no depth as a human. No offense to him, but I would never, ever want to go have a counseling session with him because he has nothing valuable to say other than to listen to me complain. Now, one of my best friends in the world is also trying to be a psychologist. He's currently about to finish his undergrad. Then he's going to go to New York to get his master's degree. So he doesn't have a master's degree. He can't technically work as a counselor yet. One guy is working as a counselor. The other guy can't do it yet because he doesn't have the piece of paper required. Who's a better counselor today, though? The guy who's been through stuff and has a lot of depth as a human? The guy who's an undergrad? Even though he doesn't have the piece of paper, he's still a better counselor. He's a guy I'd way rather get advice from and way rather have a conversation with than the lonely guy who's miserable, but he has a piece of paper. My point is that having a degree, having a piece of paper doesn't necessarily mean it's not the story, right? Having a piece of paper is cool. Having 35 touchdowns and 3 interceptions is cool. Doesn't mean it's not skewed, or doesn't mean there's not something more to it behind the scenes. So people mistake stats for the story all the time. It's just not true. It drives me nuts. The same way some people think that having a degree makes you smart. Some of the smartest people in the world don't have degrees because they found a better option than getting a stupid piece of paper. It's the same with statistics. Your numbers can very easily be skewed. And if you're playing great football, if you're playing quarterback at a high level, your numbers are going to be good. But you're good because of the things you're doing that cause the numbers, not because of the numbers. Why is Patrick Mahomes good? Is it because he had 50 touchdowns? Or is it because of the things he did to get 50 touchdowns? Does that make sense? It's a different level of depth. And that's how people most often completely misunderstand stats in the world of football.